Hi, it's great to see you again here today. So, in this video, I'm just going to suggest a few things because I really would like you to think about how you can make your scroll your own. What I'm going to be doing is I'm just adding some background texture to the shore area of my scroll, but I don't know what your scroll looks like. Yours might not look like mine. I feel like I want to downplay the pattern on this beige piece of cloth and make it look a little bit more organic and like a beach area rather than a patterned piece of cloth, which it is. So I've started out by adding some French knots, and I think we've looked at French knots in the past, so I'm not really going to give you a tutorial, but but I did a few French knots, and then I decided that they were too slow. So I've just decided to move into what's called seed stitch. And if you're familiar with French knots, you're more than welcome to use them. This is a really good place to practice them because it doesn't matter if they're scruffy and messy looking. It's just texture to mimic the look of sand on the beach. But the these these little seed stitches or straight stitches, really teeny tiny ones, are way faster and they give you a nice effect as well. And they're so much easier. So they're just little tiny straight stitches that kind of move around in whatever direction you want. And I'm using beige thread because I don't want them to be really noticeable. I just want them to be textured. You know, when you think about the color of sand, there's lots of different colors in the sand, but they're all basically neutrals, beiges, grays, pale whites, off whites. But if you wanted to do something more dramatic, perhaps the beaches where you live, there's lots of beach glass, and maybe you'd like to do lots of blues and greens and browns to reflect that in your piece. Or maybe there's lots of bits of coral or bits of broken shells and things like that, and you want to bring in more peaches and oranges and the colors that reflect those things. It's really up to you. And I will spend quite a bit of time, as long as I'm enjoying it, I'll keep doing it, and then when I don't feel like I'm enjoying it anymore, I'll do something else. So I actually like just sort of sitting and stitching, especially when the stitches don't really require a lot of my concentration. I don't like to do a lot of really complicated stitches that I have to think about. It's really nice to sit and stitch like this while listening to an audio book or uh, a podcast or something like that. And for now, I think that I've done enough of those stitches, so I'm going to move on and do something else. And I could, if I felt like it, I've got this other piece of cloth that I cut out here that could be a little rock. I could put a little rock on my piece if I wanted to, but I'm not really feeling it today, so I'm just going to leave that off to the side and not worry about it. But one of the things that I think I'd like to add to my piece is at the beaches where I live, you often see driftwood logs that are sitting up on the beach, and they're really nice and convenient to lean against when you're sitting at the beach. I've got these strips of brown cloth here that I'm just going to sew on again at that same angle, angling from the upper right down to the lower left, but not in a parallel line necessarily, but just generally in the same direction. It's following the same direction as the shoreline. Again, just using straight stitches to get them secured in place, and then I'll decide what I want to do afterwards. If you don't have logs on the beach like this, or you don't want to include them in your scroll, you absolutely don't have to. I would really encourage you to make this your own. If you want to put logs like this in the water on your piece, you could certainly do that. Or perhaps you'd like to revisit some of the other things that we put in the water and put them up on land. Things like the starfish or the crab, or maybe some of the seashells. You can certainly put those up on the shore, on land in your piece. But I would suggest that you not cover up all the areas, because I have some plans for next month that include a little bit more stuff up on the beach. And the other thing that I'm going to mention is that I did all of this stuff up on the shore, and I did all this textured background without thinking that some of it may get covered up. Having all these really textured areas and dark bits might make it a little bit hard for me to do some of the other things that I have planned for later. So it may be a good idea to do this after the fact and add some of the other bits that I'm going to show you later on before you do too much in the way of background elements. Now I've got 2 logs in place. So I did the running stitches to secure down the logs, but I thought that they just looked like pieces of cloth that had been sewn down. And I was thinking back to the tree bark that I did way back when I did the garden scroll. And what I did was I used a stitch that's called stem stitch, which creates a really nice solid line which has a little bit of texture to it. And the way that you create this stitch is you go forward 2 stitch lengths and then you stitch backwards halfway along that stitch. Forward 2 stitch lengths, a double stitch length, and back 1 stitch length, so back halfway. So forward 2 and then back 1. So to create sort of a nice tree bark-like texture, I'm just going to go back and forth, creating several lines of these stem stitches. And I always have a little bit of trouble getting started, and I have to really think about, oh, how does the stitch work? But that doesn't matter. I don't need to rip out those fumbly stitches at the beginning of the row. I'll just leave them there. They add to the texture, and the organic variation of this piece does not have to be perfect. I can even vary which side off the stitch I come up on when I'm doing that back stitch part of it. And I'm using thread that does not contrast very much, so it's hard to see, but it gives you a nice subtle texture. And I'll just go back and forth there. I'll do that with both of them. So now you'll notice that I've got some little ducks on my piece here. There'll be another video that will be all about the ducks, but for now I decided that I really wanted to revisit these logs a little bit more, and I wasn't really enjoying them, and I happened to come across this really narrow piece of brown cloth, so I've decided to include that and give my logs there some branches. Stitch that I'm using, it's called couching. It would be really hard to stitch into this really narrow piece of cloth without shredding it. So instead of stitching into the cloth, I'm stitching around it. I'm starting on one side and then I'm stitching a straight stitch around to the other side. Then I'm coming up on one side, going down on the other side, right at the edge off the cloth. And so this is how I work. If I don't like something after I think I've finished it, I don't worry about it, because I know that I can always add more stitching later, because not everything has to be perfectly finished right away. Let me show you what else I did. So I'm going to do some little tufts of grass, because I often see little clumps of grass at the beach. So I thought I would add some of those in as well. And they're just in the palest pale yellow color. And I'm just adding those in, little tufts, 3 or 4 strands, 3 or 4 straight stitches, all clumped together at the bottom and a little bit spread out at the top. And this is something that you could definitely do underwater. Little tufts of seaweed like this, you could certainly do it. And they're just really simple stitches. So I'd like to invite you to play around with your pieces, and what would you like to add up onto the shore? Do you want to put a crab up there with the ducks? Anyway, thanks again for watching. Happy stitching. I'll see you again soon with another video. Maybe the ducks. Anyway, bye for now. See you again soon.